As we all know, pathways represents a significant change for everybody, and it's very much a journey that we're embarking on. And so we're going to take this opportunity to help people better understand what does it mean to go on a journey of change. Well, let's first start by reflecting on our history of change in Toastmasters. As you know, back in 1924, when Ralph Smedley founded Toastmasters, he knew that the world needed strong communicators and effective leaders. His teachings and style of feedback was documented in a simple transcript that was first copyrighted in 1928. In the 40s, the first basic training manual that you can see here on the second image was introduced, and it went through several modest iterations over the following decades. Now, the look may have changed, most recently in 2011 with the global brand update, but the core content and format remains largely the same with the competent communicator, competent leader, and advanced manuals. Yet how we learn and what we want to learn has changed significantly since the CC and the CL were developed. These days, our time is more limited than ever. So we want to customize our experience to learn exactly what we need, when we want it, and not just have a generic program that offers limited skills. So it's so exciting to be on the cusp of the next change in Toastmasters history. Pathways is in fact the greatest change to the Toastmasters education program since Ralph Smedley introduced that basic training manual back in the 1940s. But not everyone is necessarily excited by change and is ready to embrace it with open arms. Change disrupts the status quo. It can bring uncertainty and even resentment. So before we look at how to deal with these feelings of change, let's first talk about the forces for and against change. What are our members saying about pathways? What forces are supporting the change to pathways, and what forces will make the change more challenging? Now, for those of you who were at our TLI sessions, you know we divided you into two halves of the room and got you to talk about it. But as this is for the benefit of people who will be in their own sessions, I asked them to pause the video now and have this discussion. And for those listening now, we'll share with you some of the suggestions that people brought up in the TLI. To give an example, a force for is technology. People want easy access to learning material, and technology gives us a lot of opportunities. A force against is cultural. People who join Toastmasters have very much done so because they like the focus on public speaking in the club setting. And there's this perception that maybe having an online e-learning format is moving us away from that. I'm not saying these are right or wrong. I'm just saying these are forces based on what people have fed back. So what are some others that have been identified by TLI sessions? Well, for, in addition to technology, is the desire for flexibility. People like to be able to fit this around their lives, and that's different for everybody. They want it to be really relevant. They want it for them. And that means that by being tailored, that's really a force for. They want options, and Pathways provides 10 different pathways and numerous electives within those pathways, and easily accessible. With people on the move and flexible work conditions, this means that there's different times and places they want to be able to do their learning. And we can't forget the importance of a greater corporate appeal. The Pathways program is seen as something that's much more contemporary, in keeping with a move to online blended learning, as well as the fact that it offers more than 300 competencies. These are all tremendous forces for moving to Pathways. But then we can't dismiss those very strong forces against it. Technology is the most frequently referred to one. The fact that not everyone has the same level of computer literacy, that this concern about pop-up blockers and how to manage that, and not necessarily understanding how best to work in what is essentially a learning management system in Basecamp. People's lack of experience with pathways, is it a little bit the blind leading the blind, and not having enough time to prepare. Certainly Patricia had only a few months to get a group of pathway guides together and get us rolling out our sessions. In recognizing these forces for and against, it just gives us some perspective about the thinking within a given club. And that's the first step one needs to take. The fact is, adapting to change, like pathways, is a journey. And like any change in life, from moving house, being made redundant, or upgrading to new technology, there are stages we all go through. Now, this journey is based on the research of a Swiss psychologist, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who back in the 60s identified the stages of grieving when someone loses a loved one. And then the industrial psychologists, in looking at this more closely, saw a lot of similarities with the experiences and the feedback that people in the workplace were giving when they experienced a change. And so they've adapted these stages of grieving to stages of change, and we often call this the change curve. Many of you may have heard of the change curve. For those of you who have, this should be a good refresher. And for those who haven't, it's a simple way to better understand where your members are on their journey of change, adapting to pathways. Well, the first stage in the journey of change is this shock and denial. That initial shock that such a major change is happening. And though some of us heard about pathways over a year ago, let's not forget that many of our members have only heard about pathways in the last 2 months. So for them, it's like, what the? And that's when denial often comes, when people just want to put their head in the sand and just stick to business as usual, either believing that it's a flash in the pan, won't be seen through, or that they've got a few years before they have to really do anything about it. The next stage of the journey of the change journey is resistance. This is when people complain and push back about the change, highlighting all the reasons why pathways won't work or the problems they've heard from others. They can put a lot of effort into this and they tend to be pretty vocal. But they often then start to realize, well, it's here, it's not going away, and that's when they start to bargain. They try to negotiate a way to avoid the change and stick to the old ways. This is where they really make that case for 2 years transitioning from the traditional program to pathways. So let's not make a change now. Let's stick with the traditional program. We can change later. And they don't put any effort or support behind those who do want to make the change. This is often the lowest point on the journey, when people just aren't willing to make an effort to support or make the change. But fortunately, we start to see a turn for the better. People start to explore. They start to adapt to the new future of Toastmasters. Their energy picks up as they ask more questions, learn more, and move into the testing stage. Here, they start to explore the Pathways program, agree to look at the paths, check out how Basecamp works, do a self-assessment. They might not start the program, but they're certainly dipping their toe in the water. And this is where they start to accept the use of pathways for themselves. And this journey of change ultimately can result in integration, where pathways becomes their new way of doing Toastmasters, and they actively support, promote, and even mentor others in pathways. Now, looking at this journey, it's one that we all travel for the change to pathways or to any other change in our lives. The reality is we do so at different rates. At any given time, your members can be in different stages of adapting to change, and we need to accept and respect this. We can't just tell them to get on with it and accept this is the new way. You're going to be left behind, because that's only going to further entrench the negative feelings they might have about making the change. But also keep in mind that some people have enthusiastically embraced pathways and appear to have jumped ahead from shock right through to integration with barely a flicker. But even the most enthusiastic can regress once they explore pathways and then come across a few things that aren't what they expected. And this raises doubts and uncertainty. And then they can fall back to, let's say, resistance or bargaining. And the classic example here is Ross Wilkinson, because Ross was really keen to be the first person to complete level 1 of his first path in District 17. And he went ahead and did what he needed to do, came across a few stumbles, but he coped with that. But then he was frustrated because though he got a certificate in base camp, it wasn't coming up as recognized on the district reports, and he couldn't understand why. It's only when he spoke to me that we talked about the fact that you need to ensure that you process someone's pathway award, and you do so through Club Central, not through base camp. It is just like processing an award for the traditional program, preferably the VPE, but it can be any of the club officers can process the award through Club Central, and instead of selecting a traditional award, they'll be selecting the relevant Pathways Award. So we did that for Ross, and now he has his full recognition. So remember, though many of you are leaders in your club as club officers, you're also members and therefore adapters too. So you need to take a moment to think about what stage of this change journey are you in now? Now, think about the members of your club. Where do you think some of them are along this journey? When you start to realize that people are in different stages to yourself, then you can start to think about what can I do to first help me move forward and how can I help others? But before you do so, let's talk about what is needed. So ingredients for adapting to change. This is where we need to make sure that people appreciate that lasting change isn't something you make people do. They have to choose to change their mindset and behavior, and there are some key ingredients individuals look for to make this choice, to embrace the change. The first is to have a compelling story. This is where people need to understand what is being asked of them and that it makes sense to them. Now, if you already aren't fully aware of why we're even moving to pathways, then it's time to have a chat to Ray or spend some time in the Navigator document, and even further, go online and watch some of the videos that introduce pathways, because they make a compelling case for why pathways is the next best step for Toastmasters. Well, it's all well and good to have a good story, but they need to see people doing it. They need to see it role modeled. They need to see their leaders talking it up. They need to see their club officers supporting it and scheduling people on their programs to do pathways. And they need to see members starting to embrace it, see them behaving differently, even if it's just saying that they'll explore it and give it a go. But they can't give it a go if they don't have the skills in order to do it. And this is where they need to have the skills and opportunities to behave in the new way. The fourth one is, in fact, the most important, that the members can see that there are structures, processes, and systems that support these changes, that we're not still stuck in the old way of doing things. This is why agendas should be looked at. People need to make sure that the membership form reflects it, that the guest packs have pathways information in them, that you have regular educationals added to the program, and that any way of tracking people's progress, particularly if you're doing a good job of having some sort of poster that people can look over when they come to their club meetings. All of these things are really valuable, but they need to reflect the new way of doing things. So if you're a bit behind in making those changes, that's one of the best things you can do to help people adapt to the pathways change. But if we really want to get them to move forward, so for every stage of the change curve, there are different strategies. There is no one strategy for all. If you try and say one message, people will just tune out if they're not ready to hear that message. So by understanding where a particular member is on the change curve, you can use one of the strategies I'm suggesting for people in that stage. So it might seem like a lot of extra effort to be tailoring your strategy depending on where they are along the change curve. But I promise you it will pay off, because by taking this approach, you'll get a better response and you'll be less frustrated by any pushback, complaints, or plain old inertia. So let me share with you what some of these strategies are for each of the stages. For people in shock and denial, the focus is communicate the change. By being able to provide accurate information about the why are we changing to pathways, and being clear about what you do and don't know about pathways, you're helping provide some valuable information that they can start to comprehend. It's not about saying they should try it. This is just about factual information. And I've heard a lot of people say what they think happens in pathways, and in particular in base camp, but in fact, a number of those are not correct, and it's just based on hearsay. So unless you know for sure, always turn to your experts, and in this case, Ray is your expert as a pathway guide, and others listening to this, whoever your pathway guide is, has really immersed themselves in a lot of learning and development, and in particular, of frequently asked questions document of more than 150 pages. And it covers any number of questions that have been asked worldwide. And anything that isn't in there, we're able to ask TI, and they add it to the list and provide us a pretty rapid response to our questions. Now, for people in resistance and bargaining, it's all about addressing their concerns. Remember, you need to take time to be a good listener and give them a chance to express their reservations rather than dismiss them out of hand. Once you can acknowledge the challenges of the change, not necessarily agreeing with them, but that they find it challenging, you can start to provide encouragement and support. And this is where educationals, demos, and just Q&A sessions are great ways of addressing concerns. The next two stages, adapting and testing, people are starting to put their toe in the water, is all about supporting that exploration. And at our club, Aspire, we hosted a speechathon on the weekend. And this was a chance to help a number of people just keep moving through the traditional program because they want to get their awards so that they can jump into pathways. But we also had some pathway presentations and people like myself doing the evaluation project. So these are great ways to start to recognize those starting pathways and to provide examples to others who are thinking about it. And then when we've got people who have, they're loving it, they're accepting it, they're starting to integrate it, that's the time to celebrate and validate those milestones, to recognize those members and encourage them to become pathway mentors. So where to from here? In wrapping this up, I encourage you to think about pathways as a change journey. It's not just a hard and fast, this is how it is now. Yes, we've got the benefit of a couple of years to transition between the two, but given that all our new members should be starting on pathways, we can't delay bringing more experienced members into the program. So for those of you watching this in a club, for instance, you should be thinking about having a discussion about where you're at in the program. And for those of you who are thinking about this as leaders, maybe with your next club officer meeting, consider talking about some of your members and sharing where you're at compared to where you think some of those people are at. It's all about, in the first place, recognizing where they're at. Don't forget the 4 ingredients to make sure that you're helping people change their mindset and behavior. Provide that compelling story. It's not a one-off announcement. Make sure that you're role modeling what you'd like people to do. Provide them with the training so that they've got the skills in order to use pathways. And make sure that your own processes and structures within the club are reflecting the changes to pathways, that it's something that is seen as very much part of the way forward. And that's how you can learn from the lessons of the stages of grief back in the 60s through the change curve that's taught throughout the corporate world and bring it to bear in your clubs for the success of pathways. I'd be happy to take any questions. I'm going to hand back to Ray and we'll see what we can do here.